Part of the reason why I set my goals for 30 was because, in part, moving from New Jersey and Chicago, where I felt really comfortable, down to Georgia, where I felt very much like an outsider. That combined with my very independent streak and strong will meant that I carried a huge chip on my shoulder that promoted this sense of invulnerability. So, by God, I was going to get my doctorate and show all of those folks. And in many ways, everything I had done to move forward in my career was done as much out of spite to show everybody as it was for the external recognition and reinforcement.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun at all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today's episode is brought to you by Exec HQ, a C-suite fractional firm providing elite executives for your business. Today, Jeff is interviewing Risa Stein. Risa is the founder of SeeInMe, a HIPAA-compliant profile management portal, including social, behavioral, and medical information, allowing caregivers to deliver tailored empathic care. Risa has earned a PhD in clinical child and health psychology and an MA in organizational leadership. She also has an extensive behavioral medicine research and publication record, as well as 20-plus years dedicated to teaching undergraduate students. You can learn more about Risa at SeeInMe.com. That's SeeInMe.com. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Risa.
Risa, welcome this morning to the Corporate Couch.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, so you and I met, and hopefully I don't mess up Zach's name, his last name. So Zach Ocean Banjo, I think is the
Ocean
pronunciation.
Banjo, I believe.
Yeah, so and it was great because Zach and I only met once through an introduction, and then we've exchanged emails, and then I was very excited to meet you just based on your background. And then when we met for coffee, I just there's some people you meet with for the first time, and you're just like you get a connection, and I don't know if it's a East Coast, New York, New Jersey thing. I don't know, but and we're both heritage is I'm Italian and you're Jewish, so it's we're both stricken with guilt from our family and all that good stuff.
Nailed it.
So yeah, we got that going for you. At least you have a doctorate in psychology, so you probably deal with it better than
Lifetime
me.
of trying to figure that stuff out.
Exactly. Exactly. So, but yeah, we're going to talk because I love your career. It's fascinating to me. And we're going to talk about what you started here and SeeInMe. But let's start with a fun question. Even people that know you fairly well, Risa, what would be one thing that would surprise them about you?
So I was actually having a conversation with one of the folks who's on my board, and we were at the CASA breakfast for foster care and the court appointed special guardians. Anyway, I was talking with him at the breakfast, and he said, if you see some guys here who look a little rough and they're wearing leather jackets, it's because they are in a motorcycle gang, and they go around and they protect the kids who are being threatened or neglected. And I said to Mark that my daughter enjoys telling people that I too used to be in a motorcycle gang. And he's like, really? That seems
Wow.
incommensurate with your presentation. And I said, well, yes, it is, because it wasn't actually a gang. It was just a group of friends in high school who used to ride our motorcycles together. But
Wow.
I don't think most people would suspect that I would have ridden
Yeah. What kind
motorcycles.
of bike did you have?
It was just a Kawasaki 450, and I might have mentioned before that I'm the firstborn in both sides of my family, and my dad wanted a boy, and we grew up poor, so I couldn't get a car, and he wanted a motorcycle, so I got a motorcycle.
I love that. Wow, that's great. That is really good. So, you grew up in New Jersey, correct?
I was born there, and we lived there for 7 years.
Okay.
So, some formative years, but then we moved to Chicago for 4.5 years. Then we moved to Atlanta, and I was there from sixth grade to finishing high school. Then I lived in Tennessee for college and grad school. Then San Antonio for my internship, and when my husband was in the Air Force. Then I did a year in Portland, Oregon, then back to San Antonio, and then we moved up here 27 years ago.
Oh, wow. And remind me again what city in New Jersey you were born in?
I was born in Livingston.
Livingston. Okay, great.
We lived in Livingston, Piscataway. Both my parents grew up in Newark.
Okay, yeah. So AT&T country out there,
Yeah.
Piscataway and Morristown. What was fun for you growing up in Jersey and probably Chicago in the early days?
Mostly I've been an introvert most of my life, so fun was reading, doing arts and crafts projects. My mom is very artistic, and my dad, bless his heart, would try. So there was always a lot of art things. I grew up pre-internet, so most of my fun, other than solitary things, was playing board games with my friends in their basement, jacks,
Yeah,
life,
Jax.
things like that,
Yeah, yeah. What
old
was your
school.
what was your favorite board game?
We used to play life.
Life was, yeah, the
Yeah.
spin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Get kids, put them in the car. Yeah, yeah, all good. Love that. Love that. Our kids are relatively the same age, probably, but we used to always try to play board games, and it was internet for the most part. But even with devices, we still would try to play board games. I think it's important to kind of do that. But
I have a friend who is an ethnographic researcher, and one of the jobs she did was for Milton Bradley, and she looked at the way people play board games, particularly things like Monopoly, where people tend to get very invested,
right, invested.
pun intended.
Yeah,
And it was really cool listening to her talk about how families in the US would play and how explosive it would get versus
right.
how they would play, overseas, like in the Nordic countries or in Asia, how much more competitive Americans were essentially.
Yeah. So, did you have any aspirations as a child? Hey, when I'm an adult, when I grow up, I'm going to be this. What was this for you?
No, interestingly, by age 7, I knew I was going to be a psychologist. So that's all I ever wanted to be. It's all I ever wanted to do. So that's all I ever had my sights set on. I knew by the time I was 30, well, I initially wasn't going to get married or have kids. It was just be a psychologist, total career focus. But then eventually I decided that by 30, I wanted to have my PhD, a husband, a new house, a new car, and my first kid. So Justin came in June, 2 months under my 30th birthday.
Wow.
So, yep, managed to check off everything on the list.
Wow. What was the new car you purchased?
Oh, I think I got a Saturn,
There you go.
which was my first stick shift. And I got that when I moved to Oregon, which incidentally is not the best place with all of the hills and mountains to learn how to drive a
Right.
stick shift.
Right.
So,
Yeah. That's
I figured it
funny.
out.
That's funny. So, why do you think you wanted to be a psychologist? I mean, what was there a mentor? Was there a book, a teacher?
Yeah, well, my uncle, my mom's younger brother, is an experimental psychologist. And when I was little, at least this is my recollection, he worked at, I don't remember if it was Rutgers or one of the universities in New Jersey. And he used to take me into the primate lab that he worked at. And I thought, well, geez, working with primates and monkeys. Could there be anything more fun?
Right.
That's what I started out wanting to do. Then at the time, Three Faces of Eve and Sybil, the
Okay.
multiple personality stuff
Yeah.
was really big. So that fascinated me. Then I get into the more scientific side of it and recognize the holes in all of those theories and diagnoses. So then I decided I just wanted to become a clinical psychologist and do some research, do some therapy, and try all of that out.
Yeah. So you go to Maryville College in Tennessee, right?
Hmm.
And obviously graduate with psychology undergraduate, right?
Right.
Yeah. So then you go, is that a common, so you went right to get your doctorate right after, that's what it looked like on your LinkedIn. Was that a planned thing or is that the normal course of becoming a psychologist? I would not know.
It's the normal course, and for the students who don't lose their scholarship and party too much their first year in college, they usually go directly into a PhD program. For those of us who were wallflowers in high school, had too good of a time in college, went to a small school that didn't do any research and filled their applications for doctoral programs out in red crayon, we go to the schools that accept us because we are breathing and have a check that we can pay with. So I went to the University of Memphis, which actually has an outstanding PhD program. It was between there and Appalachia State in North Carolina because my dad was a traveling salesman, and those were the two places that he would visit every 6 weeks. So I knew I could at least get a hot meal every 6 weeks.
There you go.
Yeah, so I ended up going into the master's program first at the University of Memphis, got my crap together, got my GRE scores up, did some really great research, found some wonderful mentors, and got into the PhD program the next year.
Yeah, and I know this became later in your career, but then so you go into a master's program at Rockhurst in a Master of Arts in Organizational Leadership, and you had to be, I think it was 2016, so you graduated, with your doctorate in early 90s, mid 90s. So what was the impetus there? Kind of like you already got, more degrees than a thermometer at this point. So then you decide, oh, I'm going to get my Master's of Arts in Organizational Leadership. What was the kind of impetus there?
Yeah, so first of all, going back to school when you're 50 and taking classes from your colleagues, because I was teaching at Rockhurst since 1998 when I went to the Hellsberg School for my master's degree. That in and of itself was unusual, but the trajectory to get me there had more to do with the fact that, as I mentioned, I checked off all my life goal lists when I was 29. So fast forward another 20 years, and I was a bit bored. So some of it had to do with just wanting a change in pace. I had started a couple of clubs on campus after a kind of a near-death life-changing midlife crisis experience. And so going back for the master's degree was just sort of a way to shake it up, see what else is out there, get to know some of my colleagues in the business school. I had a friend at Rockhurst who had gone through the program prior to my entering it, and she had a good experience with it. So it was there, it was free, had a great reputation. I wanted to shake things up a bit. So it was really more than anything, just sort of one of those, what the hell, let's do something different kind of things.
You could have went for an executive MBA or something else. I mean, why organizational leadership?
Because I didn't want to take the finance class and accounting class required for the MBA.
There you
To
go.
be perfectly honest, um, I liked the organizational leadership aspect. I
Yeah.
liked the functioning of organizations rather than the day-to-day nitty-gritty stuff. And yeah, it's just I thought it would be interesting. I never had any intentions of doing anything with it, just personal edification and growth.
Right. I saw when you got your doctorate, or maybe it was an internship early on, that you were at the Air Force with their smoking cessation program. It was a funded NIH. Talk about that and what's the key to stop smoking? Not that I smoke, but maybe you can help some people.
It was actually, so that was a grant that one of the professors that I worked with at Memphis State, well, it was Memphis State at the time, it's University of Memphis now, had working with DoD, military, and my husband, as I mentioned, was in the Air Force. So it was at his Air Force base. He was working as a behavioral psychologist at Lackland Air Force Base. And so the grant involved looking at the basic military trainees, the folks who were going through the boot camp. And at the time, a lot of them were smoking. And so we were trying to figure out how to get them to stop smoking. Some of the ways we initiated that were to stop the smoke breaks that you only got a break if you smoked. And if you didn't, you had to keep doing push-ups. So we modified that. We, showed them image important aspects. So we take a picture of an airman with a cigarette in his mouth and an airman without a cigarette in his mouth and ask them, who portrays the image you want your younger brother to see when you put on the uniform. So we got across messages that way. And I was the project coordinator for that grant. So at, again, 20, I wasn't even, I was maybe 27, 28 when I got out of my doctoral program after the internship and started working there. And this was after my postdoc too. So I'd worked in the VA for a couple of years, but here I am, a civilian working in basic military training. And this was really my first leadership position because I had several current active duty military and several retired folks working for me on that grant. So I had, Chief Master Sergeant who had 4 tours in Vietnam. I had an extremely buttoned up looking military, he was a TI, a training instructor, like a drill instructor working for me. And they have a different approach to respecting authority. So the way they would challenge my perceptions on how to engage in science was a lesson in and of itself for me. And then learning how to help them respect my knowledge despite my youth was another important aspect that I learned working with them. But it was a great proving ground.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, you have kind of 3 things going against you: your age, you being a civilian, and being female, right? Probably.
And actually being a doctorate, being a clinical psychologist
Yeah.
meant that you don't know anything about our life inside
Right.
the military base. So that part, the especially the degree, they see a big difference between officers and enlisted. And had I been in the military, I'd be an officer. So the enlisted people interact very differently with the officers. And so I was grouped in with them. So there was that divide I had to understand as well.
Yeah. So, what did you lean on to help you in terms of having this, first leadership position? Was it a mentor, or was it a book or books, or what did you what enhanced your learning besides the day-to-day kind of interactions?
Just trying to learn everything I could about the military operations. My dad was a Marine for a short period of time. Didn't help a whole lot, but
Right.
I understood a bit about the military at that point. Understanding that was probably the biggest part for me. My approach has always been pretty much sheer will and force, which isn't always the best way to go about doing things. And I learned there that their level of respect and the way they interact with each other and chain of command was really super important. And integrating that actually softened my approach to doing things by force and will. Learning the relationships and how strong the relationships are between individuals in the military was a really wonderful learning experience for me as well. Combining that milieu with my training in understanding relationships from a therapeutic perspective really helped shape how I motivated and influenced the others to make changes, not only in the operations of the grant, but to promote the positive outcomes the grant was working towards to begin with.
What's so interesting to me, besides in terms of what you're doing now, but I think you started Rockhurst in 1998 as a professor of psychology in the undergraduate space. So, you're in a 26-year journey there that's still going on. What's the biggest change you've seen in kind of the 18 to 22-year-olds, essentially, that go through your classes? What's the biggest difference between your early days and currently that you're seeing?
So I think this is probably the case at the majority of colleges, but what we're seeing going on at the Ivies on the coasts, I don't think is quite reflective of what we see of the Gen Zs and the alphas in general. But I have noticed over the past 26 years a real change in the student body and a real change in academia in general, moving from what most people still perceive as academia being this free floating exchange of ideas with professors who are each on their own island and get to do whatever they want to do and operate in this mental exercises all day. It has become much more of a business. And part of that has to do with the demographic shift. So there are fewer 18 to 21-year-olds to go around now. So schools have to do a much better job at trying to recruit them, which means the demographics of our students have changed, not just in what we typically see in terms of the gender differences and the first time college entrants and the diversity of ethnicity and race. That's all really changed. But the mindset, the mental health, a lot of that I noticed going back about, it was definitely pre-COVID. So probably around 2013, 14, I started noticing a real change. At first, when I got to Rockhurst, it was very white bread. I mean, everyone in my class, all the girls were Katie's or, Mary Catherine's or,
Right,
some Catholic
right,
version, and they
right,
all had blonde hair. And I'm coming
right,
from Memphis and San Antonio. It was really difficult for me to remember their names or distinguish one from the other.
right.
But now my classes are much more diverse. What hasn't changed is the trepidation in appearing to be the least intelligent person in the classroom. So the stakes, I think they feel are higher now for not being the most intelligent person in the classroom. And from what I have seen with my business colleagues, that translates big time into what happens when they graduate and enter the workforce. So a few years ago, after my midlife crisis, when I wrote the book and I tried to start becoming a little bit more creative, I taught a class in creativity and I asked my honor students, who are the worst about having to stay between the lines and not being cognitively flexible, to do a creative project. And I said, does it matter to me what your creative project is? Define it as you wish, but you're not getting an A in this class unless you do a creative project. You engage in some sort of creativity. I was blown away by the backlash. I had students coming to me in tears. I had students telling me that this was literally, quote, going to decimate their grade point average. I had students come to me on the verge of physical violence, that this was going to destroy their lives if they had to do something creative, which, of course, in my mind means they need it that much more. So
Right.
by the end of the semester, they all thanked me for forcing them out of their box to do something a little bit different. But these days, I think the students are willing to operate in a variety of different mindsets, but the imposter syndrome is still there. That risk that I'm not going to be perfect, that you're going to see right through me and everybody in my class is more intelligent than me. And the fear and the trepidation that results from that equates into not asking questions, not being curious, not being inquisitive. And, I tell them at the beginning of the year, you're not going to get your money's worth out of this college experience if you don't admit that you don't know everything yet and you don't take the risks to ask the questions. So I have had to work extra hard over the last 10 or 15 years to create a psychologically safe space in my classroom. That doesn't mean that we don't challenge conventions and we don't talk about really difficult topics, but to make sure that they know that I can be vulnerable and model that so that they can be vulnerable and feel comfortable opening up, and I'm not going to throw an eraser at them or something.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So, I mean, I think like so. when we went to school, a lot of I know for myself and many of my friends, we were first generation college graduates, right? Like, so do you think the fear of failure with, the undergraduates today is a parenting thing? They're just the parents are pressing their children to excel. What do you think?
I do think that's part of it. And I think it comes, so I'm a first gen also. And I think that we had a lot more latitude and a lot less helicoptering. You come in when the street lights went on,
Yeah,
kind of thing.
I'm sure.
And nobody even asked what you did all day.
Right.
And now, and I'm guilty of this myself, there's a lot more helicoptering because we see headlines all the time about how difficult it is to get a job or an internship, and millennials can't buy houses, and you'll never be as well off as your parents. That the parents are really concerned that their kids do everything right. And there's a lot of pressure on the kids to not just compare to their peers whom they see on social media, but to live up to the expectations of their parents, who are often breathing down their necks, checking their grades, uh, you know, poking them on the shoulder. Are you doing your work? Did you do this today? Did you do that today? And I think that makes them feel as though they are less capable, and so they start out on shaky ground, uncomfortable with their abilities, their skills, and their confidence in general.
How do you think that translates? I mean, you kind of referred to it earlier into the workplace. Once, I know you're teaching psychology to undergraduate, but I mean, how do you think that translates? Because you're definitely seeing it. Probably your colleagues are seeing it in the business school and engineering and things like that. What does that do with that generation's contribution, especially early on to the workplace?
I shared, and so as I was going through the business program, it occurred to me what they're looking for and how they operate in a corporate environment, how the leaders and the managers do. And juxtaposing that with what I had seen with my students, I think I wrote a LinkedIn post about this a while back. What I want hiring managers to know about millennials and Gen Zs is basically their mindset is, I'm not going to ask any questions, and you should just tell me everything I need to know, and don't have the same level of expectations that you have for everybody else, because if you do, I'm going to crumble. But not that I'm not capable, and not that I don't want to learn, just that I'm not going to approach work the same way as you do. And so part of the problem I think that we hear with the quiet quitting and the lack of respect, or the lack of loyalty in business, really has more to do with the boomer and Gen X disconnect with the millennials and the Zs, that we don't understand their mindset and what they need from the job, and how we need to coax them a little bit more. So when you and I showed up for our first job, it was just expected you would do what you were supposed to do, and you would outdo it, and you would do it for minimal pay, and you would do it at extra hours, because that's how you proved yourself. And they, in general, not as a rule, my kids of course are exception, that they they want to work, not necessarily minimal hours, but they don't want work to be centric to their lives, in part because they value their free time, but in part because they're not as comfortable with proving themselves and working in the environment under management where there is that lack of certainty, the same way we were. So we just sort of, when I went into work when I was younger, I just sort of assumed that my boss knew what he was doing, that he would instruct me in the best way for me to do my job, and that I would move up the ladder if I could just prove myself. And if I just worked my ass off, I would be able to do so. They don't feel like they have that same level of, I wouldn't necessarily call it a safety net, but their mindset in that approach and their expectations are really different.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I mean, I had a brief stint. I mean, obviously, you've taught, at least 52 semesters, whatever the math is. But as we talked about, I had a brief stint a year ago at KU teaching a sales leadership class. But I was a little not shocked, but I mean, the lack of engagement. and no matter how hard I try to pull questions out and get engagement, and some of the people that have been professors that are friends of mine would say, well, some of that is COVID, because they came up through the COVID classes in high school and early college. So, but yeah, I love that your take on that, and that's very interesting. And I think that is one of the challenges of leadership today in companies and not for profits and other organizations is managing that and leading that multi-generation workforce, right? Because everybody requires some. It's different. I think a lot of things are the same, but I think the context of this, generation coming up through the workforce in their 20s today.
I heard, I'm not sure, it might have been Jonathan Haidt talking about taking his kids on their college trip. And all the student leaders, all the ones who walk backwards through giving you the tours around the campus always say, here, we don't teach you what to teach. We teach you how to, not what to think. We teach you how to think. And, or maybe it was Abigail Schreier. They said that we don't need to teach them how to think. We need to teach them how to think for themselves.
Right.
And that's a huge distinction, I think, from our generation. So when we could think for ourselves, we could make decisions, we could take the risks, and we could own them. The new generation, if the millennials and the Zs, they want to be told how to think. They look to the group think, and they very rarely develop the critical thinking skills to analyze data to say, how do I want to think about this? In part because of the helicoptering, in part because teaching to the book, and in part because they feel like they need the camaraderie of their peers rather than being able to distinguish themselves and coming up with fresh perspectives. And I think that's a big difference that we see in the workforce once they enter it.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Exec HQ, a C-suite fractional firm providing elite executives for your business. If you're having challenges taking your business to the next level, if you want to augment your leadership team, or prepare your company for increased growth, profitability, and an eventual successful exit, we have seasoned executives from every C-suite position ensuring a perfect fit for your needs and the dynamics of your industry. You will work with senior leaders who like to roll up their sleeves while checking their egos at the door. They can help your business in specific services such as strategic planning, executive leadership coaching, financial management, corporate governance, marketing, sales management, and many other advisory solutions vital to your business success. That's exechq.com. To learn more, go to exechq.com or email Jeff Palacio at jeff.palacio@exechq.com.
So you've talked about your near-death experience, and you explained it to me when we had coffee, but tell the audience about that and how it really changed your life.
Part of the reason why I set my goals for 30 was because in part moving from New Jersey and Chicago, where I felt really comfortable, down to Georgia, where I felt very much like an outsider, that combined with my very independent streak and strong will meant that I carried a huge chip on my shoulder. And that promoted this sense of invulnerability. So by God, I was going to get my doctorate and show all of those folks. And pretty much in many ways, everything I had done to move forward in my career was done as much out of spite to show everybody as it was for the external recognition and reinforcement. So those two things went part and parcel. So things started getting a little boring 15 years after I accomplished my goals. I would still, publish papers, serving on committees, getting all the awards at Rockhurst. But then in 2012, I took my son on his college trip. And the night or two before that, I had started hemorrhaging from some uterine fibroids. So I went to the doctor, gave me some medicines to take, and we embarked on the trip. The tickets were purchased, all of that stuff. So, and during the course of the trip, I had started hemorrhaging really severely, and I didn't let Justin know. I just told him I wasn't really feeling well. By the time we made it up to New York, he was having to wheel me around in a wheelchair because I was so weak. When we got back home, I spent about 2 weeks in the hospital for them to stop the bleeding before they could do the surgery. I had lost about 60% of my red blood cells and was in imminent danger of organ failure. So I'm laying there in the hospital, and it occurs to me that the predominant thought in my mind is other folks might have died, but I didn't. And yeah, that's the stupidest notion I ever had. And so I started thinking to myself, the metacognition of the psychologist comes in and says, why the hell are you thinking that? You could have risked your son's life driving around like this. What if your organs had shut down in New York with your 17-year-old son? What the hell would have happened to him at that time? So that caused me to do some major introspection. It occurred to me that everything I had done in my life up to that point, for the most part, was to make a point and to prove myself, that I never let anybody really get close to me. This whole veneer of invulnerability. All my students called me Dr. Stein. Nobody called me Risa. And so at that point, I decided I would try to make a change, try to scrap all of that. Brene Brown came out with Daring Greatly. That had a big impact on me. And so it's kind of like I see my life pre 2012 and post 2012, and it's night and day difference. So that midlife crisis, that near death experience opened the doors to a whole lot of things, connecting with other professors who were doing interesting creative things, going to get my master's in business, which opened the door to entrepreneurship, the getting started in more creative endeavors, which opened the door to design thinking and innovation, and starting a group of university innovation fellows, going out to Stanford and Google, writing the book, starting a chapter of Active Minds, which got me started on a nonprofit with an individual from the community that I met in the course of my business studies. That connected me with somebody in Australia who was interested in the mental health website I started. So I actually went down to Australia in March of 2020 of all times. But learning what he was working on got me started thinking along other lines that eventually developed into SeeInMe. So had I not let down that veneer of vulnerability and learn to take some risks and step outside my box and do something other than what I had considered I would do for all of my life and had been up to that point, none of this would have come to fruition, and it wouldn't have been nearly as interesting as a journey as it has been since 2012.
As we discussed over coffee, I think that's where I mean, not that your career wasn't interesting prior, but I mean, it really just pivoted. I mean, and you became a strategic design consultant, and and other things you did led to being the CEO of North America for Amica, I think. So you were getting to I'll say organization leadership roles, where you're in charge of the company. You wrote the book, The Best Damn Life Workbook, so I love the title, but was that part of the midlife crisis? And did you ever think about writing a book, and why this one?
Yes, it was how I got myself out of the midlife crisis. So the book was my introspection and my search for how to deal with the burnout and this necessary change in life perspective. So I went looking for other books that would help me out. And what I found were a lot of clinically oriented and science and research based books, which were wonderful. Like Susan Cain's Quiet, about introverts, was really helpful to me. Brene Brown's Daring Greatly, as I mentioned, was really helpful to me. But those were intellectual exercises and research based. They described phenomenon, but they didn't help address phenomenon. And then on the other side, you had all of these self-help workbooks like You Are a Badass, which is in theory a self-help, but is so generalized and not based on research that it totally turned me off. I can't make a change unless I can trust it and it's valid. So I went back to some of the what I consider the hallmark self-help books. My favorite one up to this point was Albert Ellis's How to Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable About Absolutely Anything. Yes, anything. And
Love it.
the Feeling Good Handbook. Those were actual workbooks. Those were how to create change based on cognitive behavioral therapy, which is my orientation. So I wanted something that would help folks who were suffering from some of the same emotional roadblocks and psychological roadblocks that I was suffering from without having to go to a therapist, but being able to work through those challenges in a manner that is backed by some science. So the workbook I created is steeped in those cognitive behavioral principles, but it does help folks starting from breaking down the vulnerability to increasing comfort with risk to then feeling comfortable with failure, which are necessary to get past imposter syndrome. And then thinking about now that the horizon is open and you can conceptualize additional possibilities beyond where you had already been, what does that look like? And how do you go about combining your interests in a way that would be meaningful? And I think looking at the work that you've done and your approach to your interviews, I think that they're real commensurate in that a lot of the advice I've heard you share and your guests share with folks coming out of college is be open, talk to people, engage in relationships, ask questions, be vulnerable, learn different perspectives, take what has worked and what has not worked from other folks. And unless you can accept that you have a growth mindset and you don't know everything already, you really can't listen to understand, you listen to respond. And
Right.
that was the biggest change in me. And that's the book is a big part of that journey. Chapter 5 is all about my journey, take that or leave it. But the rest is how to go through those steps, baby step wise, to develop a new, freer, open mindset that will enable you to take the risks that will really make your life meaningful.
As we talked before I pressed record, I did order the book this morning, researching for our chat today. But I loved one review was a person that said he never wrote, gave you 5 stars, never writes reviews, but couldn't wait to dig into it, and he's loving it, and he's 81 years old. So I'm thinking that's a person that's a lifelong learner that I don't know who has the quote, but the day you stop living is the day you stop learning. So I think that was a big testament to what you wrote, and I can't wait to dig into it.
Thank you.
So who wouldn't want their best damn life? You know? So talk about the journey and what you're doing now in SeeInMe, because I think it's just so phenomenal. And I'm a data geek, and I know it's a data-driven, not app, but service. And I just love what you're doing there. But take us through kind of how that started. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but let's talk about that.
I think one of the things I've discovered about myself since 2012 is my superpower is to collect perspectives and then converge them in a way that solves pain points. And that's what I've done with SeeInMe. So I took some of the experiences I've had as a professional and in my personal life, and then looked at what was available on the business side and created something I thought would address a need for vulnerable individuals, their loved ones and family members, and the providers with whom they work. So going back to the inception, my son has Tourette syndrome. And when he was growing up, back before the internet, it was always really difficult to share information about him. Even as a clinical child and health psychologist, there was a lot about Tourette's I didn't understand. So usually when people say, here, Tourette's, all they think about are tics and coprolalia, and it's way more than that. And so helping Justin's teachers and his coaches and so forth understand what was going on with him was really important to me, but I never could do it in a way that was subtle and memorable for them. So you drop them off in the morning and say he had a crappy night last night. He's going to be emotionally labile today. And they forget that by the time they go into their classroom. So that combined with some of my friends' experiences who have kids with other neurodiverse challenges prompted me to want to share what I called a psychosocial profile. So here's what this kid is like. Here's how you interact with him. Here are his triggers. Here are his soothing strategies. Here's his nonverbal behavior, things like that. So I looked at the personal side of that. In addition to Justin's experiences and my experiences with him, my grandfather had Alzheimer's. And so trying to figure out how to coordinate all of the care that my grandfather received in all of the many different clinics, that was challenging. Then when I started working in the military, some of my care as a military dependent was on the Air Force base, but some of it had to be external. And oftentimes that coordination didn't take place very well either. Then when I looked at the business side and I recognized how challenging it is to provide a service that patients rated highly. So you may have heard and experienced yourself that insurers and hospitals are rated kind of at the bottom of customer satisfaction when it comes to various industries. And it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. But how can I help businesses improve their interactions with their patients in a way that then drives their bottom line? And then from my professional experience as a therapist and as a psychologist, I want to know that I'm delivering the type of job that not only feeds my soul and helps me live my best professional life, but I want to know that I can actually connect with people, even if I don't have much time. So the SeeInMe holistic digital health profile was created to address the confluence of all of these different pain points, the empowering family members to share what makes their loved one unique and making them a valuable member of the health team, enabling the instant accessibility to information that enables a provider to deliver person-centered care, the ability to update and modify these profiles to ensure coordinated care that is up to date so that the profiles are easily accessed and shared amongst the entire care ecosystem, and then facilitating the delivery of optimal care in complex networks based upon interactions with that profile and learning when we need increased staffing, who's falling short in accountability and checking the individual's profiles, where adverse events are occurring, this person is having a meltdown. If we can address some of those challenges, we can increase the bottom line for the organizations or the care communities. We can improve patient satisfaction. We can decrease staff burnout, all of that stuff, while reducing the stress and the burden of informal caregivers and improving the quality of the care that a vulnerable individual receives. So right now we're working on creating a HIPAA compliant platform for SeeInMe that will also provide the interactive logs and the data that promote improvement of care in complex networks, the coordination of care, regardless of who the payer is for a particular provider, whether they're within a system or external to a system. If you travel to Mexico and something happens, you hit your head, you're unconscious. If you go to a Mexican hospital, I want to know that those folks can open your SeeInMe profile because it's not an app, it's web-based. They open it in Google Chrome and they can translate everything in your profile to Spanish. So they know who you are and how to interact with you in the most efficient and effective way possible to understand maybe your allergies, your disabilities, the medications you're on. They can call your provider back in the States. All of that kind of stuff occurs. And we don't have anything like that right now that empowers the informal caregivers to become a part of the team, to share the cultural differences, the individual person-centered differences. And we don't have anything that speaks to and travels between providers in a way that enables collaboration and coordination of care.
Yeah, I mean it's incredible, so it looked like SeeInMe was incorporated July of 2021, and it really in like about 4, 5, 6 months, you win a bunch of tech awards. Like what? I mean, you're a professor of psychology, and I know you did some, consulting in design thinking and other innovation for universities and organizations. I mean, how did you kind of put together the tech part of delivering that service?
Oh, don't operate under any illusions that I have any tech capacity. Um, this is where knowing the right people and forming the right relationships come in handy. So the absolutely amazing, incredible, and wonderful team at Wise Webs, who are very mission driven, saw what I was doing and enabled me to create the initial psychosocial platform to at least demonstrate the concept I was trying to prove, so that when I went through Digital Sandbox and got the money, they were able to build that for me. Pure Pitch Rally, Launch KC, some of the others that I received the money for. Once I was able to create a platform that at least said, this is the difference, this is the value proposition, then I was able to attract the attention of the United Healthcare Group of Kansas and open everybody else's minds to the immense potential that if we just upped it to a HIPAA compliant platform where we could share personal health information beyond just the psychosocial, we could store a life book with memories and photos. We could do custom checklists, upload documents, facilitate the note sharing back and forth, that this could revolutionize the standard of care in how we provide value in a healthcare system.
Yeah. So how did you secure that? I mean, that's a big, getting United Healthcare Group of Kansas. That's a big, check mark in terms of, whether it's called sponsorship or advocacy. What was that process like?
I guess when it comes to sales, and I'm learning a lot about sales, your passion, your advocacy, and your ability to explain what you want to accomplish and why you want to accomplish it is something that's really important. And so one of the things I have been really working with over time, having spent a lifetime in academia, is learning to speak in 1 minute bursts rather than 50-minute bursts. And being able to showcase and talk about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and what the values are behind it has really endeared SeeInMe to a lot of folks, because everybody's experienced some challenge in their healthcare or the healthcare of a loved one. And so through various connections, I was able to connect with folks at Rare KC, who address the needs of individuals with rare diseases. It was at one of their symposium in town where the then CFO of the United Healthcare Group was on a panel discussing Medicaid and how to go through the Medicaid system for kids or adults with rare diseases who have multiple needs and see many different providers. So I reached out to her just to inquire, tell me more about the Medicaid system. I know very little, but I'd like to figure out how to get SeeInMe involved because I think we can make a difference. And to her credit, Audrey Masoner is one of the most innovative, forward-thinking, and caring individuals in insurance. She's now the COO of the United Healthcare Group. And she said this could make a world of difference for the kids we cover in foster care who carry with them from placement to placement a physical binder complete with multiple papers, which are neither secure nor, permanent, and that a flood, a fire, just leaving them on the roof of your car when you leave, that this would really do a major service for those kids and help the foster parents feel more comfortable with a child arriving at their home, which would reduce disrupted placements, improve the quality of life all around for the social workers, the foster parents, and the children themselves.
Did you have any mentors, so you can talk in 1 minute bursts versus 50, or books? What did you lean into?
Being an academic nerd, I think I've read pretty much every book out there that has anything to do with startups, entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
business, leadership. I mean, I've got a huge bookshelf in my office. That was really helpful. Connecting with folks through the pitch competitions that I did through Digital Sandbox, through Pure Pitch Rally. I did meet some folks who are on my board now who have been able to provide me their perspectives. Tony Simpson is wonderful in helping me understand the business landscape. Matt Heelan, who works with Solution Ventures at KC Digital Drive, he's been really useful in helping me come up with strategic plans. Terry Jordan and Dave Patrick with the marketing and the sales and the tech side. Another member of my board, Mark Krass, he was a former lawyer for Procter and Gamble, so for labor and employment, but he's also a guardian ad litem through the courts. And then just my research background. I basically approach everything like it was a research study with the scientific method. So for better or worse, I think that aligns well with entrepreneurship, although it drags the process out a bit because I'm not going to build fast and break things. I'm going to build in a rational fashion and break the system that needs to be broken while preserving the rest,
Right.
which doesn't make for quite as good
Yeah.
a slogan. But then Eric Morgenstern helped us craft our pitches, so he was really useful in figuring out how to tell a story. ChatGPT has been really useful in helping me put in 4 paragraphs worth of information and distilling it down to one. So picking up little things here and
Yeah,
there.
no, I love it. Uh, just maybe if you can, I know books resonate differently with different people, but if you had one or two books you can recommend to a budding entrepreneur in a similar situation, what would they be?
The Hard Thing About Hard Things, that's number one, and then the Startup Playbook. Those are my 2 favorites.
Okay. Yeah, very good. I'd love to help two groups of people, and you referenced them early on. One is that group coming out of college and career advice on how to get their first job and approach the beginning of their work journey.
I think a lot of students are still driven by the advice from their parents who entered into a much different market than they are. So one of the challenges I'm having in advising my kids right now, in addition to never having had a real job, is how to look for your first job and how to take that first job and build towards a career that you think, at least right now, you want to have while being open to other things that can develop. So we would look at the job ads in the newspaper. You can look at Indeed and LinkedIn, but I really think that the job descriptions often don't capture what they actually want to do in their lives. So, for instance, my daughter, who will be graduating next year, is extraordinarily introverted, very diligent, very responsible, great emotional intelligence. And she wants to travel the world and represent brands. Well, you don't find a job ad that says that and asks for that. So how do I help her connect people who will give her enough disparate bits of information that she can put all of that together to help her understand how to craft a path by taking different jobs and meeting additional people who will get to know her and advise her into different positions to get her to that point. Mostly, I think kids just need to develop their people skills, and some of which are suffering today. They need to ask the questions, they need to meet the people, they need to sit down for coffee and allow the people to get to know them, and truly believe that it's the networking skills that will bring them to success. Incidentally, before I went to the business school at Rockhurst, I had no community connections. None. I didn't know anybody in the community, and I always thought business was a scary Jack Welch, eat the minnows for breakfast kind of
Right.
place. And so I've been really pleased to find out that everybody in the business world that I've met has been really helpful. So I encourage my students to meet as many people from LinkedIn, to have as many cups of coffee as they possibly can, and to learn as much as they can about workscape and career development. That's my best advice for them, is just have a growth mindset and recognize that everybody you meet is going to teach you something.
No, I love that advice. So, if you could recall back when you first had responsibility for people in that first leadership role, at least from an org chart perspective, what advice would you have for somebody that's just now beginning to have responsibility for people on the org chart?
Listen. Don't. And the problem, if we don't listen to understand, is that we make assumptions, and we know what happens when we assume. I think the biggest challenge for people who are in managerial positions is that imposter syndrome, and they think they need to prove themselves. And if you go into a situation believing that you have to prove yourself and you can't be vulnerable, then you can't listen to understand. You have to prove that you know everything. And once that happens, people become resentful and the whole organizational system breaks down. If you can develop the relationships, if you can maintain your confidence, but recognize that you don't always have to be or you shouldn't be the smartest person in the room, you listen to other people, you get those diverse perspectives, that level of diversity is always going to strengthen an organization. And I think folks who are taking on their first managerial role often feel so tenuous in the role that they don't allow themselves to continue learning. They feel it's too shaky ground that they need to go ahead and prove themselves first. And I think that's counterproductive.
Yeah, totally agree. Risa, I love, like I said, I love your career journey. I'm so excited what you're going to do in Seeing Me. Can the audience help in any way in terms of what you're doing at Seeing Me?
Sure. So the first two groups we're going to launch SeeInMe with are in memory care and in foster care. I'm always open to hearing new perspectives or additional perspectives. I'm always interested in connecting with individuals who work in those fields, who serve in those fields, who have lived in those fields. So anybody who is open to connecting with me, if they want to run a pilot with SeeInMe or if they just want to share their experiences with me, I'm always open to buying them a cup of coffee and hearing what they have to say and learning from their personal experiences and professional experiences.
Risa, thanks so much. You're great. I'm honored that you chose the Corporate Couch to be on today, and excited for our next conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Just so glad I was introduced to Risa. I mean, we had coffee like most times I do when I meet somebody new and before I have them on the podcast. But just, I think that at least, if not the youngest guest, so she at 7 years old, she knew she wanted to be a psychologist.
Yeah.
And she became one.
And then it's just straight line for her
Yeah.
for her career. It's amazing.
You can definitely tell she was born in New Jersey, East Coast. She's, very independent streak. She was the oldest in her family on both sides. So poor growing up. Well, not so poor, but not, wealthy enough to get a car. So her dad got her a motorcycle in high school, a Kawasaki 450, which, hey, that's pretty good.
He wanted one anyway, so he got it.
Yeah, there you go. But I thought that was cool. I didn't know one female in high school that drove a motorcycle. I don't know.
No, I don't know if I knew anybody.
She was very transparent in terms of her college and doctoral journeys. Basically, she said, she goes, I was a wallflower in high school, and then I partied in undergraduate, and then that's why it took me a little longer to get my doctorate, because I basically had a pulse and I could fill out the application form to go to University of Memphis, which is Memphis State at the time. But probably the most different guest we've had on the podcast. I mean, like 28 years teaching undergraduate psychology at Rockhurst University here in Kansas City. Has a near-death experience in 2012. Crazy, hemorrhaging, lost 60% of her red blood cells, was so close to organ failure and this all happened while taking her son on a college visit in New York. And, so she's 2 weeks in the hospital before they can even do the surgery to help her. And, she then gets through it, and she thinks, other folks may have died, but I didn't. And and the doctor goes, you're crazy. So she really did some inner soul searching, which I believe led to her book, writing her book, Best Damn Life Ever, or something like that. And it's, I actually purchased it. I was very curious about it. It really changed her life. I mean, she then several years later went back to college, so now, she's got an undergraduate, a master's, and a doctorate. She goes and gets her master's in organizational leadership, and that pivots her into kind of design thinking and innovation, and then really leading her to found her own company, SeeInMe, which is a tech play, in July 2021. And it's incredible. I mean, how she gets a strong advisory board and partners were in areas she's not strong in. I just thought it's really an amazing story. I just like her personally.
That interview could have gone on and on and on. There's so much there, and she's led such a wonderful life and has so many things to offer. It was an amazing interview with an amazing person. You know, she talked for a little bit about generations, demographic generations that have gone on. And, you know, you and I are both baby boomers, and then came the Gen X people, and then later on came millennials and Gen Z and stuff. And she didn't say it like this, but I kind of got the impression that somewhere in there, in the 80s or 90s, or somewhere after the Gen X's, I even wrote it down and put great big air quotes around it, that something happened, that the difference between these generations and all succeeding generations, there's a big difference in the way that they think and the way that they expect life to be, the way that they manage problems, the way that they solve problems. It's just that there's something that happened. Now, obviously, the thing that happened was the development of a computer and the invention of the internet, and all the stuff related to that. And how different it is now for all the generations that are coming up now, how different research is than it was, for instance, when you and I started in the industry, or when you and I were in college. We were talking about, you know, the card catalogs and actual physical pieces of paper that we had to hang around, and paying the library to make a copy of a page from a book or something like that, or a page from a microfilm or something. And
Right.
Students today have none of that. They literally just sign on and make a couple of clicks, and especially with AI and ChatGPT now, they can type in a couple of queries and almost have the paper written for them. But we're still going to expect the same kind of thing from them, so that we're just going to have to expect it differently. I don't know. I can't go very much different than that, but other than just saying something happened there and that needs to be addressed, and I'm glad that she started talking about that.
Yeah. What leadership advice do you have for our great listening audience today, Joe?
We are going to go to that great philosopher named Will Ferrell. And Will Ferrell one time said, before you marry a person, you should first make them use a computer with a slow internet connection just to see who they really are.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.